All right. Well, hello, everybody, and thank you for joining today. My name is Danielle, and I'm part of the marketing team here at BlueLink. This is the fifth and final session of our DSCSA webinar, where we'll cover costs and have a short Q&A session. I want to let you all know that the session is being recorded and your mics and cameras should remain off. Any questions that you have, please include them in the Q&A box. So the Q&A icon is right next to the reactions icon, and you can feel free to ask questions at any time, and we'll probably get to answering them at the end of the session. If you don't see your question published, we'll be sure to contact you to discuss it. I'll go ahead and introduce you all to today's presenters. We have our very own Darren Meyer, who is the CTO of BlueLink. We'll also have Gary Lerner here from Gateway Checker, and towards the end, we'll have Michael Benedict from our ERP sales team to help answer some more questions. So with that all being said, I will pass it off to you, Darren.
All right, welcome everybody. In our previous session, we talked about features that were already in the system, such as the ability to enter GTINs at the inventory item level. We showed off some of the new fields that are coming in terms of gathering master data, and we talked about the inbound scanning of product. Before we get to the pricing and cost side of things today, we're just going to quickly talk to the outbound scanning side of things. So again, BlueLink customers in terms of the supply chain tend to sit in this middle section. We've got our manufacturers. BlueLink customers are wholesale distributors in the middle, and you've got the dispensers on the right-hand side. We've already talked again about receiving, unpacking, commissioning. Now we're going to be doing the kind of packing and shipping events. So what does the outbound shipments workflow look like? Well, in the BlueLink app, what you're going to have is your person in the warehouse is going to need to scan the 2D data matrix barcodes that are on the products that you're shipping. And what's going to happen behind the scenes is as you scan those items, we're going to be doing a lookup against the previously received aggregate information. So if you scan a case that's sealed, again, the case has to be sealed for this to be valid, we're going to do a lookup against the information that came in previously for that SG10. And if we find aggregate information, you're good to go. You can keep moving on to the next item. If, however, the item that you're scanning doesn't have aggregation information, it's something that was in the warehouse from before receiving inbound ePIX events, then the software is going to say, sorry, I don't have aggregate information for that sealed case, and it's going to prompt the end user that they have to open the case and then scan the inner contents. If the thing that you open is an inner pack, and we look up the barcode, the SG10 for that barcode, and it's not in the system again, we're going to say, sorry, you have to open up that inner pack and then scan each individual bottle. When we get to the bottle level, we know that the unit of measure is, the quantity of the unit of measure is each, it's 1, and therefore we don't need to go prompt the user to scan any further. So that's kind of where it'll end. Either way, what you end up with is a set of information about the scans that your staff have performed for the products that are being shipped outbound, and we can take that information and we can pack it into containers. We can optionally print off SSCC labels, which will make your downstream customers able to do a scan of the label on the container and get all of the aggregate information. And finally, we're going to be able to produce that file. So on the BlueLink side of things, the actual outbound ePIX file that gets transmitted, EPCIS file that gets transmitted to your end customer gets created on the posting of the order. So once your shipment's complete, you ship and you post the order. That's the moment in time when we're going to make the call to Gateway Checker, for example, to request the generation of that outbound file. Now, if you happen to have electronic connections in place with Gateway Checker to your customer, then Gateway Checker is going to turn around and transmit that file to your customer. If you don't have those connections in place, instead, what will happen is that file will be made available to the BlueLink software, and then your customer, when they log into the web portal, will be able to go to the history orders, and just like now, where they can click a button to download a pedigree, they'll be able to download the EPCIS file. So for those customers who don't have AS2 outbound connections in place, you're still going to be able to be compliant and provide them with a file to say, here's what we're shipping to you, but that file will have to be downloaded manually. So again, just talking to the Gateway Checker side of things, Gateway Checker is going to automatically generate that file. In addition, there's an extra feature in the software that does allow for the generation of a human readable DCR, basically a PDF file that a person can read, as opposed to looking at the raw XML of an EPCIS file. Transmission outbound, as I just mentioned, AS2 connection is kind of the preferred method, but there is a cost to establishing AS2 connections. So we're going to cover that at the end of the conversation. Same thing with SFTP file dump. If you want to automatically transmit one of these files to a trading partner who requests it via SFTP, that can be automated through the gateway checker connection. The customer web portal is what we just talked about. Blue Link's web venture application or our upcoming BetaBop release will include the ability to click a button to download the file. And that is going to be a secure download because your customer will have logged in to the site using a username and password. If we do send an email, our recommendation is that, if, for example, we could have an ARM job that sends the invoice, also include a hyperlink that says, click here to download your EPCIS file, which would really just bring them to the website where they have to log in to download the file. So that's kind of the end of the workflow discussion around outbound shipments. Those features are going to be part of the scan set screen that you have in your Blue Link app and will be part of your 2023 release. So cost considerations, well, what are the cost elements to take into consideration? Well, the actual APIs that we integrate with Gateway Checker do have a cost associated with them. And that cost is based on tiers. So we have a number of transactions tier where a transaction is considered either an inbound transmission of one of those EPIX files or an outbound transmission of one of those EPCIS files. These are some examples of what happens inside those files. We're not going to go through that detail right now. And then the second element to consider in terms of the possible costs are how many of your trading partner connections do you want to automate, either through AS2 connections or through those SFTP file transfers. So cost element number one, per transaction fee tiers. So the way that this works is you count up the number of purchase order receipts that you're expecting and the number of outbound kind of sales order shipments, and whatever number of transactions you land in, this is how we calculate your monthly fee. Just give me a second. The next element to this is the file transfer fees, so AS2 connection fees. If you go with Gateway Checker and you'd like to establish those inbound connections through AS2, which we highly recommend, especially from your suppliers, then what you're going to have to do is establish those connections. And there are associated fees with that. The fees for establishing those connections, again, are also tend to be broken into tiers, and you're going to review that with the Gateway Checker team. Again, some of the advantages of AS2 connections, it is considered secure. Part of the configuration process for those things is to establish secure communications with certificates. There's positive acknowledgement that the data has been transferred successfully. That can be very important to make sure that if for whatever reason, at the moment in time when they try to transmit it to you, if it doesn't work, then it's going to retry automatically. In terms of the first part, determining your number of transactions, the Blue Link team, with your permission, we do have some queries already written that we can use to retrieve the numbers of purchase order receipts that you've had in the last year and the number of outbound shipments. So in terms of from a pricing point of view, when you go to talk to Michael about what tier are you going to land up in, with your permission, we can run that query for you and tell you exactly what your transaction volume would have been for the last year. Again, in terms of AS2 connections, to determine how many of these do you need, well, we recommend starting with the suppliers that you're dealing with today and establishing those connections, certainly from the ones that you buy from the most first. As you may recall, the outbound shipments, when you scan that case, are only going to work in terms of knowing what's inside the case if you've received the inbound file from your supplier. So if you get these connections in place now, in the next couple of months, we can start building the data from your suppliers about that aggregate information that we can take advantage of later when you go to do those outbound shipments on the new release. So we don't need the new software in place today to be able to start gathering this aggregate data on the way in. We just need those inbound connections. So that's really the thing that we need to get working on as soon as possible. You may also want to survey your customers to determine how many of them will require AS2 connections for the transmission of information to them. We're expecting this really to only be required for the largest of the chains. A lot of the mom and pop type pharmacies, we're not expecting to have the sophistication of knowing how to receive these AS2 connections, but that may not be true. You never know until you ask. So that will determine your cost for how many connections do you need to be able to support. Another thing to consider, do we have Gary on the line yet, by the way? Danielle, do you happen to know? This is one of his.
Gary,
I've been here. Yeah,
Gary, why don't you talk to this slide, because this is one of you. This is kind of talking to how you onboard suppliers, and I'll transition to you here.
Sure, thanks. And, turn on my camera too. Why not? Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. This is just a representative kind of timeline that everybody should consider. You know, what makes sense, and it's broken down as Darren has outlined, looking at the supplier and looking at the customer. And the most important thing we think at this point is to survey your suppliers and start the process of getting data connections going. We've already been doing that with a very small number of BlueLink customers, because I'm sorry, I said customers, BlueLink suppliers to BlueLink customers, because those particular suppliers were very eager to get going. And in fact, in at least one or two cases, we're getting ready to go into production with the connections. Every one of these connections is going to require some level of test. We're planning to set up two environments, a test and a production environment. And it's going to take some time to make sure everybody's comfortable that the files coming across are accurate, complete, and coming across as needed. Furthermore, your own process and procedures are likely to change with serialization. Hopefully that's been evident if you've sat through each of these seminars or webinars. You know, it's fairly disruptive, this thing called serialization. So you're going to need to start to think about what kind of workflows might need to change, or what you might need to do to accurately receive a shipment and put it away. There is a draft guidance written by the FDA. I think we've discussed it, called reconciliation, and that may need to be factor into your workflows. As you get, there's really no reason in the next, and Darren, I don't mean to put you too much on the spot here, but from our perspective, we think in the next quarter, we could be receiving these serialized drug transactions. We could start to receive them immediately, as Darren said, but we can start the process of what it looks like from your perspective to receive these shipments, and what it is that Darren has put together to witness these various events. Somewhere in that timeline, you also want to start to think about customers, right? What does customer readiness look like? And I don't know if any of you have reached out to your customers, or more importantly, if your customers have reached out to you. You probably have a mix of customers, from very large to very small, and their needs are going to be different. There's also several different emerging solutions that industry is putting forth to try to make it more accessible to get hold of the files. Either way, we'll be there to support you. I think Darren did a great job of outlining what the options are. Most important takeaway from this slide, there's a lot to do. And it's not going to just happen quickly. It's going to take some planning and thinking for you to restructure your internal processes to be able to pick, pack, and ship from a serialized product standpoint, perhaps train some staff to do things differently, and document the processes and whatnot as you go forward. Okay. Hopefully this timeline just, again, it's everybody's individual timeline is going to be different. The attempt here was to try to put a timeline for a very large provider that might have 150 suppliers and, I don't know, 2,000 or 3,000 customer ship tos. Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So next slide, I guess would talk to a little bit about what that survey might look like in terms of the onboarding. Correct, Gary?
Yeah, that's right. So this is the kind of information that we would need if we were doing a AS2 connection. Regardless, I think it's really important that you start to reach out to your contacts. Most of the suppliers should know about these kind of questions. They've been asked it themselves. They've been asking it themselves of perhaps you or others. But everybody's got sort of the same need here. We need to understand what are the file formats, the structure, and what's the best protocol. By and large, the bigger the organization, it does seem like AS2 is the predominant mode of going forward, but that doesn't mean if you only have one or two or one transaction a month with somebody that we couldn't set something up that would work really well as well.
Exactly. So that kind of lands us in the Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to type them into the chat. I think it's probably worth mentioning that if you decide that you're going to go with Gateway Checker to establish those connections, the Gateway Checker team, Gary, again, I don't want to talk too much in terms of what you'll do, but we're expecting that we'll provide some templates for you that you can then send to your suppliers for those survey questions. So you don't need to write them down from the presentation, for example.
Right, absolutely.
We'll provide you some templates that you'll use with respect to onboarding. The other thing that the BlueLink team will endeavor to do is take advantage of the fact that there are a lot of you who are dealing with the same supplier. So if we've already received the information from Pfizer, for example, and you're dealing with Pfizer, then that'll be one less supplier that you have to manually go gather the information from. So because that information is consistent amongst manufacturers. So once we're dealing with a particular supplier or manufacturer and we have their information, we're not going to ask you to go retrieve the same information again. So we're hoping the more of you sign up all at the same time, the less work there is for you to do as a team or as a group.
Yeah, there should definitely be some leverage here. And trying to get our arms around that would be very helpful. The other point of leverage, and it's just hard to know, is that if a good number of your suppliers are using the same platform, so for instance, at the moment we're connected to TraceLink, SAP, I'm blanking on who else we're RFXL. So that's a good healthy swath of the drug manufacturers. There's probably another 2 or 3 out there as well. Leveraging those connections, I think, is very helpful and should allow us to scale a little quicker.
So we don't have any questions just yet, but I just want to reiterate that everybody can answer questions in the Q&A icon. So that's right next to the reactions icon at the top of the Teams screen there.
Maybe you answered all their questions, Darren. Did a great job.
I guess so.
Yeah,
right.
It looks like it.
Well, we'll wait another minute or two for any questions to show up, but if not, thank you for attending this session, and our team will be in touch to review your options.
We'll definitely be sending out an email with this information as well. So if you think of questions over the next couple of days, it's a lot of information to take in, but our team is here whenever you guys have any questions.
Okay, well, it seems like there's not going to be any questions. Thanks everyone for your time today, and we look forward to chatting with you guys soon.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Bye, everybody.
Take care.
Bye.